Welcome everybody in for another episode of Compyl Security Sessions. I'm your host, Dan Tagney, and today we're going to be discussing navigating the security framework maze. How do you choose the right security framework for your organization? Well, today we're going to find out. By the end of this, you will have 3 things you can walk away with. A better understanding of the importance of selecting an appropriate security framework. You will also gain insights into popular security framework. Wonderful panel will share their expert opinion and some of their security framework favorites. Lastly, and maybe the most important part of this, you will learn best practices when it comes to implementation. So without further ado, I will pass this around and allow each guest to introduce themselves. Ron, you are a newcomer to the show. Why don't we start with yourself? We'd love to learn a little bit about you.
Great. Thank you for having me, first of all. My name is Ron. I've been in the IT cybersecurity business for coming up close to 250 years now. No, it just feels like it. 21 years.
Dumbledore.
21 years, very soon. It's going to be 21 years. I've worked in small companies, 3, 4, 5 people. I've worked in big companies, been contractor for 55 companies at 50,000 people. My last role was VP of a financial firm that had 1,000 people, and now I'm on my own pathway, helping out people get into cybersecurity and also providing expertise that I gathered along the way to different companies that need of some help in their cyber posture. That's a little about me.
That's great. Yeah, Ron, I'm a big fan of your stuff on LinkedIn. You post some great content. So any viewer that's watching this, please go check out Ron. He has always sharing great tips. Stas, I would love to learn a little bit about yourself as well.
Sure. So I'm Stas Bajuka. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Compyl. My background's information security, so similar to Ron. I'm in my 20th year of doing this. I have a degree in the space. I've got every accreditation in the space, or pretty much every accreditation in the space. And my background is financial services, but security and compliance focused, just heavily regulated organizations.
Very cool. Thanks for being here. And Will, if you want to round us out.
Sure. Hey, everybody. Will Kosofsky. So 20-something, I think 24 years in the industry, working most of the time in consulting and managed services, currently working at Stratascale, where I do a lot of strategy and go-to-market planning, that kind of stuff. And yeah, excited to talk about frameworks. Said no one ever. But yeah, let's do it.
Yeah. Also, I'll just explain that I'm in a suit because I'm at a conference and I'm doing a keynote. I'm doing a keynote speak. This is perfect timing on NIST CSF revision 2. So ask me anything about that framework.
Did you study beforehand?
I did.
Read everything?
I did. So it's, I mean, realistically, it's a new function that they're introducing, right? It's a governance function.
The governance route, yeah.
Yeah, but it's a lot of it is just overlap between the other 5 functions, and there's a couple of new sections. It's basically, I mean, I wasn't going to go into this, but it's basically accountability is what they're getting at, right? They want accountability for risks and incidents, which wasn't specified before, and holding people to disclosure and timely disclosure. That's pretty much it in a nutshell.
Yeah, I'm sure them and the SEC had no idea that those 2 things were going to come out around the same time. So,
oh man, it's funny. There's 2 CISOs at this conference right now. One's from Amtrak, and the other one's from JetBlue. And they were both talking about when do you disclose and like how much trouble you can get in if you decide it's not an incident, but then you find out that it is an incident, and then you could have disclosed, and then they start reviewing what should have happened, when it should have happened. Yeah, it's pretty dicey. Anyways, sorry, Dan.
Have your definition of material ready. That's what it is.
Yeah. What's the definition of material? Nobody knows.
Ask legal.
Ask legal. Yeah, legal knows.
It's funny.
Legal knows.
They both also said that they have retained counsel themselves personally, which like I'd never really thought about before, but it makes complete sense. And the Uber thing is really interesting as well. I got some like interesting insights on Uber, and I don't know if you guys know this, but the guy, I forgot his name, but the CISO that got fined, and you know, it was tried. He was the general counsel for Facebook, and when he went over to Uber, he retained the general counsel status, but also was the CISO. And the reason that he's doing that is so he wanted to claim privilege on conversations that he didn't want people to have knowledge of, which I didn't know about. But that's ultimately what they said, that wasn't the reason, but I think you could kind of.
It's super weird. I just got off a call with another CISO who was talking to another like, you know, that I won't say who, but it was somebody who, because they were named in litigation, that person has been out of pocket like $1 million
Wow.
because they were named in something. So yeah, that is a concern and a risk for that those in that role for sure.
The question is, and I think this is probably a different conversation altogether, probably a different episode, is are CISOs has any fiduciary duty at all?
Well, they're not.
They're not an officer of the company. Most CISOs are not officers.
Right. They don't have DNO.
Right?
They don't have parachutes. They don't, most of them, I mean, you know, in very few organizations, they do that. It seems to be, and it was funny, we were talking about this with, I've had this conversation with a couple of CISOs the last couple of weeks, is it's like, so, and some of them make really good money. Like if you're in the right region, there are 7-figure roles out there, but it's kind of like, they're not going to treat you like an officer though. They're going to give you a bunch of money and be like, shut up and take it. And that's, so, and there's a lot of director VPs now who are like, I don't really want that job.
Yeah, they just attach the word CISO to their title, and all of a sudden they're CISO, despite the fact they don't have any of the benefits or pay of one.
The officers.
Yeah, but
sorry, Dan.
Sorry, Dan. We hijacked this conversation.
But it's funny because they're also like, you don't go into a board call and you're like asking the CFO, you're like, hey, like what cash position are we in? And like, you know, we're doing well. Like, no, I don't believe you. I want to check it over myself. Or like, and you don't do that with like the head of like legal or finance or HR, but CISOs, right? You tell them, you're like, hey, there's a couple of risks to the organization that are pretty massive. Well, what's considered a risk? You don't know what you're talking about. Like,
or the opposite. They're like, I saw this thing on the news. We need to care about this. That's like number 15 on our list of things to do, guy.
Yeah. It's so far down. Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
I think this, you know, we've talked about this before, but this really, you know, it's a byproduct of like this framework conversation, but it's overall, I think the whole conversation of, you know, elevating information security into the boardroom and being able to have somebody deliver that information, you know, without watering it down, but not too technically. But it does start with a framework, right? A guidance of where the organization is going to go. The framework is kind of like your North Star. You know, think about like at the end of the day, the idea is just to, you know, manage security risk. That's what you're trying to do. So Stas, I want to start with you. I love that you brought up NIST, and I mean, but there's quite a few security frameworks, right? ISO 27001, CIS control, SOC, PCI. Like, help me. Like, let's start at the beginning. Like, why do we need security frameworks? Why are security frameworks here? Why is that kind of North Star needed in an organization when it comes to security?
Well, for a long time, there was no frameworks, and everyone was doing whatever it is they wanted to do in order to try and secure an organization. There's obviously gaps, and in order to bridge those gaps, people started putting together best practices and basically fundamentals of what an organization should be doing. There are frameworks for very different things. There are frameworks that are very fundamental. There are comprehensive. There are some that are very specific to industries and niches and things like that. But the whole point of it is that you can feel comfortable using somebody else or get comfortable with the security that you have in place and be able to measure it, and also be able to measure it against other organizations that also have it in place. But it's really more that you don't forget to do something, is more that what I look at it.
Interesting. And Ron, I'm curious with your experience. I mean, at the end of the day, like, I can't imagine security professionals are looking at these frameworks as like a one size fits all. Like, hey, as long as we just do this list of things, like we're secure and we have nothing to worry about. At the end of the day, there has to be some customization that's going on to these frameworks. With your experience, I'm curious maybe if you have an example, or maybe an example, you know, from a colleague of somebody implementing a framework that like just didn't really fit 100% or didn't give the organization the coverage they were looking for, and maybe like what they had to also add or adjust to get kind of the level of security they were comfortable with?
I can bring up some stories I have. The main thing to remember is frameworks are all inclusive. It's like most of them, like the NIST and the ISOs of the world, which is the general frameworks everybody knows about. They're very inclusive, so they're very big. You have to tailor them to your specific needs and to your organization. Now, sometimes, depending what you do, NIST is heavily Americanized, for instance, right? That's the American way of frameworks. ISO is very European. That's the European way of doing the framework. Depending, sometimes you have a company that's either American or European, or it might be both. You need to borrow from each of the frameworks in order to comply with whatever regulations you have. If it's European regulations, including GDPR, for instance, this framework doesn't talk about GDPR, right? ISO has a little bit of more of that in there. GDPR is also a privacy framework. So you have to mesh it all together to make a cohesive document. Now, I like to compare it to frameworks to like an architect. They have these huge plans of a grand masterpiece. Now, what we do as security professionals, we're the contractor. We're supposed to build the thing, the grand thing. And we look at those plans and say, well, this is not going to work.
Engineer shows up and is like, nope.
Engineer shows up. No, we can't do this. We can't do this, but we can do this to make it like the framework wants. But we can have a glass dome measuring 50 yards above it. We can have like a smaller dome from glass. That's what's going to happen. Architects have the grand vision. Engineers, contractors, they actually need to build a thing. So that's what we do. We build the thing from the framework. So we borrow from here, we borrow from here, but we borrow from here, and we make it work. And it has to be very custom tailored to the business itself. Sometimes businesses don't have certain things that the framework calls for, so it's okay to remove them. It's a framework. That's the meaning of it. You can take things out and you can put things in.
That's great, and I love that analogy. Yeah, that was very well said. Will, I'm curious because you sit and kind of advise and help organizations kind of meet their goals, right? And every organization is going to have different goals when it comes to security. When it comes to an organization successfully, let's say, implementing a framework or getting themselves aligned with a framework, what are some of the commonalities you see in an organization that's able to do that versus the ones that maybe struggle? Is it budgets? Is it resources? Or is it all the above?
Yeah, I think generally speaking, it's got to be, it's about the individual. It's about the attitudes, understanding that like it's not a destination, right? So I always say that a framework is your roadmap, right? It's in order to Stas's point, back in the day, we just did things because we thought this was a good way to do it, and so the framework says, well, here's the road you actually need to take to get to this destination. But the reality is there is no destination, because it's all about continual maturity. Because first off, if you're on a 1 to 5 scale, you're never going to be all 5s. If you are, you're lying to yourself, or your auditor is probably. I say that generally speaking. Maybe there's a 0.001% of companies out there who can do it, but
never seen it.
I've never seen one. Yeah.
I've never seen it.
But yeah. Well, I mean, because we've all assessed or audited somebody, and nobody's got asset management figured out, and that's step 1 on the NIST framework. So there you go.
Because that's the hard. I mean, that and data classification, right? I mean, like
data classification. That's a whole
nother world. Yeah,
it's a whole different world.
Now you're getting into privacy anyway. So
it's because there's no shiny. Sorry, well, I didn't mean to cut you off. But there's no shiny tool, right? And there's no tool is going to tell you what your assets are. You're going to have to there's tools that can help, but someone actually has to go and do the hard work, and it's super it's super boring, and nobody wants to do it, but it's really important.
Part of the frameworks that I dislike, they're not realistic. Classify your data. We're a data-driven world. There's data everywhere on multiple databases in multiple locations.
Yeah.
Good luck. Even if you have a team of 20 people, good luck in finding all of that data and classifying it.
It's not going to happen.
It's tough. So to that point, it's not an end goal. It's the framework. It's It's a way to operate your business, just like policies and procedures, just like HR has policies and procedures. I went through, we've all been doing this long enough that we probably worked at a place that had casual Friday, and that meant you didn't have to, like, Stas is dressed casually for that business, right? Every other day you're in a suit and tie.
Yeah.
I got one of the companies I got hired before is like, here's our dress code, and it's people in shorts and tank tops, right? So things change just like they do in any other part of the business to adapt to it. And so that's really what I think, to be successful, you have to realize, look, this is a journey we're on, and this is going to help us guide that journey. And that's really what it's about. It's not getting to the end.
Yeah. And how do you, Ron, I'm curious, how do you get buy-in, right, from outside of just the security team or, IT team? How do you get buy-in from an organization that, hey, this is kind of the direction we're moving on our journey? And when organizations are implementing frameworks and improving their security, most of the time when they're doing that well, it's across the organization. It's not just a security department playing, catching the bad guys. It's everyone kind of doing their part. How do you get buy-in?
Well, there's two types of groups. The first type of group is the regulated companies. Each and every regulated company has to do it. They have no choice. If they don't do it, they get hit by fines by the SEC, FTC, Department of the Health Department, whatever departments that control those regulations.
EU.
EU, yeah.
All the
EU,
DPAs.
The ISO, but not that ISO.
Those,
the other ISO.
you get ahead. If you're a private, small company, non-public, booze. Not just kidding. You need to bribe the CEO and CFO with booze. So, so it's, you have to bring the plus and minuses. You have to bring the risk to the table. It's a little harder if an organization is not regulated, but you have to approach it in a way where you talk to them about risk to the business. You have to talk to them about financial risk, because a business needs to make money. If a business doesn't make money or a business loses money, it's out of business, right? There's no business anymore. So if you frame it in that, and if you show them numbers that if they invest a certain amount of money to protect a certain amount of assets that are, if they lose that money, it's going to cost them times 1,000, you can reach them. Because if you're telling them, I need a $50,000 platform to protect 20,000 worth of information, they're going to say, get the hell out, right? You have to show them how it's benefiting them, and also how it makes financial sense, because these are business people. They talk numbers, they talk money, and that's why some people ask me sometimes, how do I become a CISO? I say, study accounting and finance, because you need to know to talk business to the business in order to get your agenda through.
I'll simplify what Ron said. Like, you talk to the business. Don't talk. If you can't, if you can't explain it in business terms, they're not listening. They're not going to hear you. If you're the guy running around saying the sky is falling, that doesn't mean anything, right? You've got to be able to show the value and whatever, and understand how the business works. I provide that sort of guidance to anybody that I can talk to or mentor, or who asks, coming up, when they talk about what skills or certifications and they want to become a CISO, like, learn how the business operates. Like, the first thing you're going to do there is be like, all right, well, how do we make our money, right? How does this company that I work for make their money? And then what do I need to do to make sure they continue to make that money, or deliver on their mission?
Reasonable level of security for that organization based on their threat landscape and their risk appetite. Because, like, the amount of times that I've walked into organizations where, like, the former whatever was, like, focused on, like, the stuff that really doesn't matter to your organization, while, like, there's glaring holes in, like, the parts where, like, they're losing position data, but we're really, like, we really care about, like, what cars people are driving because they might get it's just you have to know what you're protecting and why you're protecting it in order to be successful. But, like, just like at this conference, like, the amount of times that we've talked about, like, CISOs not being able to explain to their boards or to their management team what is going on, why things are important, and being able to spell it down to, like, this risk is going to cost us this much, the probability of it happening is this, and this is the impact, and not just going off on some giant tirade about someone's device hasn't been connected for 3 weeks, and then we need to disable.
We need to
too much
disable that
detail.
device. Yeah,
That's
Yeah.
too much detail. They don't need that.
they don't need
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, exactly. But it's being able to relay to the business so that they understand what's going on.
Stas, you know, I know tomorrow you're speaking about the NIST 2.0 framework. I'm curious, just as you're looking at that and some of the things you're going to share, what was interesting to you about the update or the proposed update, and how much of it do you think is, you know, is easy to implement, or is going to be organizations are going to be able to kind of, or what are they going to struggle with?
Yeah, oh, that's funny because yeah, I pulled this one out of a hat, so I didn't pick it. It was given to me.
We're going to cut that, Stats.
yeah.
We're going to cut that part.
Yeah, okay. Let's cut that part. Because like, sorry, just on like on a funny note, right? So I'm doing the last keynote at 11:30 tomorrow. So I'm standing in between them, lunch, and a weekend, and I'm talking about NIST CSF. Like,
Oh, that's going to be exciting.
yeah,
People are
Yeah.
gonna just hold their seats and just tune in.
oh man,
You're gonna
it's
get there early.
yeah. But no, I mean, out of, you know, as far as like as far as frameworks go, I actually think the NIST CSF framework is quite a good one. I know that it's very American focused as well. Like I was in the UK for a number of years, and ISO was really what you know, the Europeans focused on, as Ron was saying. But NIST is very comprehensive. NIST is also free, which makes a huge difference. And it's more prescriptive, so it actually tells you exactly what you need to do, and it gives you some examples rather than both ISO, SOC, like they're very interpretive. GDPR very, you can interpret it, whereas NIST is very prescriptive as what good looks like, and I find that really helpful. In terms of the, you know, in terms of the updates, in terms of the version 2, they're introducing a new function for governance, and it's really just putting accountability for people to take accountability for risks, for incidents, for when they report it, for when they're reporting to, what do they do with it, being able to follow the life cycle through an incident, through risks, making sure that you're staying on top of your reporting requirements, your regulatory requirements, and if those things are falling through the cracks, you have to speak up and make sure that people are aware of it. That's the gist of the changes. Otherwise, they just repurposed a lot of the stuff out of the other 5 functions into the new governance function and added a couple new sections in, but it's more or less intact. They just taken out like both ISO, actually pretty much all the frameworks like ISO, PCI, that was updated last year as well. They've all pretty much taken out a lot of the stuff around data centers, because more companies are like, it's not relevant to them anymore. So they've reduced a lot of
SOC 2 for those guys will cover it, right?
Yeah. Yeah, but then I mean the SOC 2 thing is a whole other can of worms, right? I mean, like you have like a 5-person organization giving me a type 2 that literally has nothing in it, but it's telling me everything's fine, and like I don't know, that's a whole different ballgame.
Yeah. Will, any you know, Stas was talking a little bit about NIST. Any other frameworks that you're seeing as far as being popular or common or easier to implement than others that stick out to you?
I think it depends on the organization, honestly. I remember when this CSF came out, like the first time I saw it was it was a manufacturing company, very, you know, well established for, you know, in their industry, but very small security team, very you know, mostly IT people, didn't really have a program. And first time I saw it, I was like, this is kind of simple, right? Versus, you know, ISO 27001 to 27002 thing. And so like for them, it was very good. Like it was very applicable for, I've seen a lot of small businesses who their first encounter with security is because they found out they had to be PCI compliant, which for them is very good because it was very prescriptive of, hey, you need to do this, like to the technical level. So I think the success comes with understanding what's going to be, again, what's right sized for your organization. I think more importantly than that, though, especially for mid and enterprises up as you go on, you're going to have more than one, right?
Well,
I mean, if you're a healthcare organization, you've got a ton of things you've got to deal with, right? If you're a heavily regulated financial services, there's a ton of things. I mean, if you're lucky enough to be, privately held and work in an unregulated sector and, kind of check all these boxes where there's not a whole lot of things, then yeah, you can say, I'm just going to be in this CSF shop, but, I'm going to outsource my card processing so I don't have to worry about PCI. And, I mean, there's ways to get around it, but for most, you're going to have to do multiple things, and having harmonized compliance is really, or harmonized framework is really where it comes down to, which is being able to say, okay, I've got these 3 things I'm going to have to be compliant with. How can I make it as effective as possible? How can I be efficient, especially when it comes into auditing? And that auditing doesn't have to be a third-party auditor showing up because you have to do it, but even internally, right? If you have people who are managing GRC or people who are just helping you, or consultants or whatever, showing up once a year, make it easy for them, right? Let's look at all of this stuff all at once, and this one control, this one requirement is going to hit all of these different points of the frameworks. Like, simplify it, and not simplify and dumb it down, but simplify and make it all. It's a lot of, if you do all the prior planning, everything up when you actually get to execute it, it's always easier. And we all say that, we all know it. And that goes beyond security, like project management, any type of new product plan, and anything you've ever done what's brand new. If you take just a little bit longer in that planning stage to think about and do it just right, it's going to make the execution easier. And so I'd say the same thing with sort of harmonizing those frameworks.
Yeah, I think what you're looking for is continuous compliance and a one-to-many relationship mapping.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, and again, continuous, right? It's not in a day. Like, this is what we're going on, and here we go. Let's build this into the, like, what I loved about, or what you were saying about the NIST new stuff, is all they've really done is document what we already knew had to happen, which is program management, right? Program management equals governance. Like, it's all the same, all the different words for the same thing. Like, making sure that this is happening, making it auditable, and putting, some rails around how we're actually going to manage this.
Like, for me, like, I have continuous like pop-ups all the time that are like, you need to review this, like, this vendor needs to be like, is everything still okay here, like, you have an update. Like, I need to get prod and poked for all this stuff as well. Like, there's too much stuff to handle and remember, and this is why, if you don't have a process in place, you will forget it, and by the time you get audited, it'll be too late because you haven't done it in your observation window.
And these frameworks include a review clauses that says you have to review this every X amount of time. This is not this is not the end of the story. It's not like you created this frameworks and policies one time and you get to sit down and enjoy your martini. That's not going to happen. Right. It's continuous improvement. It's all the time. And even in the middle of it, all of a sudden the SEC comes up with something. You're not going to wait till the end of the year. Oh, I have 7 more months to review it. I don't need to change the policies now, right? No, you have to change them now. So you have to do it now. FINRA comes up with a new thing and you're doing in healthcare. So you have to do it now. It's not something that you can let go. So you have to be aware that these policies, these frameworks are flexible. Even if they're not officially changed, you know that the change is coming. So you better be prepared for it.
And that's a great point. I think we kind of talked about it around it at least, but is flexibility, right? Even if like PCI is a good example of this because it was very prescriptive. If nobody's coming and giving you a NIST CSF certification or sticker, right? There's no certification for it. So you can kind of pick and choose what you want to do. But like PCI, no, you have to do these things or you fail, right? But you can also make a case that, well, I don't need to do this because X, Y, and Z. I have compensating controls in place. This doesn't apply to me, right? So people look at this as like, oh, I've got this daunting list of things to do. But well, no, look at it logically. Like I think you kind of get that way, even if you are getting externally audited for any kind of one of these frameworks, if you can explain to the auditor and the governing body why this wasn't done. I mean, when GDPR, I won't say first came out, but when it was early on, there were some challenges with a certain very large company in the way that they did business, that kind of out of the box, it wasn't GDPR compliant. And, it was kind of like, well, the recommendations I made were, well, maybe it is, or maybe it isn't. The reality is your business processes aren't compliant, right? But what you can do is look at everything that you have to do and then find all the gaps. So say you find 18 things within GDPR that you're not doing right now. And sure, I can only fix 10 of them, because of these other 8, I just can't do it. We'll fix those 10, document that. And then if something happens, you're legally defensible, right? Look, it's about due diligence, right? You're not getting fined because you failed the audit. You're getting fined because you got breached or because there was an incident or there was an event. So again, thinking about this as sort of an end goal isn't the right way. It's that framework, and the intent behind it is to help you manage your security.
For sure.
And I also think if you got breached, if you did everything wrong, right, auditors come in, police comes in, FBI or whatever the policing body comes in and sees you did everything right, but you still got breached, you're not going to get dinged, or at least not as hard as you would have if you failed.
I had a former client who, sorry, Saz, I had a former client who would they would do their maturity scoring, and they would test themselves against a more heavily regulated industry than their own, simply because they knew if they got breached, they were going to be way above anybody else in their industry, and they were going to be on par with this other heavily regulated industry. So they created a legally defensible position. Like, there's no argument that they were not doing what they, due diligence was covered.
Yeah. Yeah. You have to like, I mean, this is just good practice, but like, just to, cover your own like ass, right? Like COA, like you have to document all this stuff out, right? If you're having risk committee meetings, like, you make sure that they're minuted and that you capture that they want to accept the risk, because ultimately it's a business's decision whether they do it or not. And if you document all of it, you're good to go from a legal perspective. The worst thing you can do, and I've seen this happen so many times, where you have CISOs or the information security managers agreeing to things that they know are unrealistic for them to deliver in a period of time, and then working themselves into a corner, being like, you said we were going to be at this maturity level for identity access management, and we're going to have all this stuff in place. And not only do they not have access, they don't have control of a lot of the IT teams, their priorities, their budgets. Like, I just don't understand why people work themselves into these corners. Like, I'm happy to help, I'm happy to advise, but this is not ultimately my responsibility. My responsibility is to guide you guys and to make sure that you stay secure. How it gets delivered is a different conversation with a number of different teams brought in together. And I'm just here as, an advisory.
And you can accept the risk.
Exactly. Yeah. It's exactly that.
Yeah.
And CISOs has a problem letting go of that concept, that they're not the ones that are responsible. Yep. It's the business that is responsible for the decisions and accepting the risk. So any time that a business accepts a risk, they have to document it. They have to have that little check mark or a little expert in the meeting notes that said X, Y, and Z accepted this specific risk. And that's it. And I know it's hard for CISO sometimes to release that from their mind, because I was in that a long time ago as well. But it's not my call. It's the business that makes that decision.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's like working with legal, right? Like, you ask legal for advice. No one's going out to lawyers because they want to. They're going out because they're concerned about something, right?
Right.
And if the lawyers tell them not to do it and they do it anyways, that's their decision. But like, the lawyers advise them to do it or not to do it. Like, it's the same scenario here.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I think Will's, to kind of round this out, I think Will said this earlier, and it was, it's the truth. Security is a journey. There's no destination. And at the end of the day, if you look at something like ISO 27001, which was recently updated, prior to that, it wasn't updated since 2013. And hackers are getting more and more sophisticated, and new threats are emerging every single day. The moment a framework gets updated, gets published, and an organization begins trying to align with it or implement what's considered best practices, those best practices are out of date. So I think the idea is know your business, know what's important, and know how to protect it. Sure, take a look at these frameworks. They're important. They offer insights, but at the end of the day, no one's going to know your business better than you are, right? I mean, that's the truth of it.
Yeah, and going back to the analogy of the architect, for instance, so somebody built a very nice house. 20 years ago, it was a very nice house. You're not just gonna, and it's your house and you love that house and you think it could be a little bit better. You're not gonna wait for the architect 20 years to send you new plans. You're gonna say, I want to expand this bedroom, and I want to make a better yard, and I want to knock down this wall. And that's exactly what we do. We don't wait for the frameworks to come in and then say, oh, we're very surprised at what the frameworks have been saying. Let's start the journey all over again. No, if you're not, changing everything almost real time, you're not
Yeah.
doing what you're supposed to do.
Although
Yeah.
to that point, code does change, and when your air conditioner goes out and you have to replace it, and you find out, well, what you used to have to
Oh
do,
yeah,
you
definitely.
actually
Yeah.
have to buy something 10 times better now that costs 3 times much.
Yeah, the electricity in my
Yeah.
house, for instance,
Yeah,
it's a 8 gauge, and now it needs to be a 10 gauge,
Yep.
and I'm like, well, that's how the house was built. So what do you want from me?
Exactly.
It's
I like the analogy.
Stas, I'm curious just from your perspective. Obviously, you work and advise across many organizations. Do you typically see kind of NIST being a common framework that organizations are wanting to align with? I know it's industry dependent, but I'm just curious. Is it popular? Is it how do you look at it when an organization is a little unsure and recommending them a framework?
I think most of the time organizations are unsure. They don't have a preference one way or another. The preference comes from their customers. So whatever their customer has a preference for, they have a preference for it. I think what's really good about NIST CSF, kind of like what's good about GDPR as well, is that if you're compliant to those two, you can be pretty much compliant with a lot of other frameworks because they are, well, NIST CSF is prescriptive, like I was mentioning before, but it maps across all of the other, like it maps across really nicely against ISO, PCI, SOC. I actually have the list here in front of me because I'm doing this speech.
FISMA, FERPA.
Yeah, well, because
whatever.
these other frameworks,
They're all derived from it.
They're all derived from NIST.
Yeah, exactly.
So if you
Almost
have
every
NIST,
framework points back to NIST or ISO. That's my joke. Like,
Yeah.
like any new framework that comes out is going to be like, you need to do this. See ISO, blah blah blah.
see
See
ISO, yeah, exactly. See
Yeah.
ISO.
it's
Exactly.
800 dash something most of the time, right?
853 version 5.
Yeah.
Version
3
5.
Rev 1.
But the other thing, like, it's like what I've seen a lot of customers do is they'll go from having nothing to being able, like, they're like, we want to implement NIST CSF 853 revision 5, which is 1,093 controls. Guys, you don't even have policy management in place. Like, you have no business doing this. Like, pick your battles. Like, that would be my one. Like, the advice I would give them is like, NIST is a good all-rounder. If you can comply to this, it's great. GDPR is the same thing. If, like, customer wants to be compliant with CCPA, or they want to be compliant with I forgot what the Virginia one is right now, Virginia privacy law. Like,
They're also derived from NIST, by the way. So
Yeah,
if you're,
It's all, yeah.
and that's what I'm getting at. And the GDPR one is really good because, like, although it's not as prescriptive, but if you do everything that it tells you to do, you should be compliant across all the other US privacy laws. The one in Canada as well. I can't speak for the rest of the world, but my experience has been like, just comply with GDPR. It will get you through all the other ones with a few, like, few changes here and there for specific states, but like generally, like, they're good all-rounder frameworks, I think.
That's great. Well, this was a great, healthy conversation on frameworks. I know, Will, this was an exciting, thrilling topic you were looking forward to. So I'm glad we were able to squeeze it for all it was worth. I want to thank the three of you for making the time for this. And Ron, we would love to have you on for another episode in the future. Thanks so much, everyone, for being here.